It's the idea that going back to 2005 to 2010, there was a really pervasive view that we had run out of oil and gas. There's this view of peak oil. Now people talk about peak oil and refer to peak oil demand, but it used to be you talk peak oil was the theories ascribed to King Hubbard as an old shale geologist
Sure.
and peak oil supply. And then we brought on the shales. And to put the shales into magnitude, the shale oil fields went from 0 to like 10 million barrels a day crude. That's basically what Saudi Arabia as a country produces today. It took
Right.
Saudi Arabia 30 years to ramp up to that. We did it in a matter of 4 years. And we also brought on a shale gas industry that when you convert it from BTUs from gas back to oil, it's almost as big as a Saudi Arabia again. So it's like we brought on two Saudi Arabias in the same country within 5 years. And so I don't blame anyone for not really studying Hubbard peak oil supply during that period because it seemed as though we had a huge abundance. And we did. When you look, the numbers really go off a chart. But if you were to back out for a second all the shales, which I'm not suggesting that they're not real or whatever, but if you were to look at conventional non-shale production, all of Hubbard's theories are dead right. Oil supply, conventional oil supply did peak around 2009, 2010, and it has been in decline ever since. And the same has been true of peak natural gas. And it's been backfilled by this enormous new source, which is the shales. And it was so big that it seemed infinite or endless. But what we actually started to notice is that a lot of the fundamental tenets of peak oil could also be applied to the shales. You take the shales, stand them alone in isolation, and they also follow these big Hubbard curves. And you can look, and some of the early shale gas fields, which were the first ones to be developed, which is the Fayetteville and the Barnett,
Right.
those have both ramped up, plateaued, and are now in decline. Both are like 60% below their peaks. And we started to look at some of the underlying geological numbers behind when we started to run out of new growth, when we started to plateau, when we started to decline. And it very much follows a Hubbard curve. And so we said, okay, well, where are we then today with the Marcellus, the Haynesville, the Permian, the last shale basins that are still, robustly producing? And we came to the conclusion that, most of those, not all of those, are now squarely in middle life. So they might have a little bit of growth left in them, but not nearly what they were able to grow early on. They're basically in the plateauing period and could decline. So, again, these are kind of like longer term, medium term trends, a year, 2 years. So any given month, you have a lot of noise, and you might get another, million barrels over a couple of years in total. But the days of growing like 1.5 million, 1.6 million, whatever the peak growth was, those seem to be behind us. And so I think as we now are 3 years into this bull market and the energy price is high and you're getting some growth, but very, very little out of the Permian. The Marcellus has basically been flat for 6 months. The Haynesville now seems to be pretty flat too. So what does that do to the incentive to drill? Well, I think, if you're an energy CEO and you claim to have kind of like a 15-year, 10 to 15-year inventory of really good drilling locations left, and you're running a 2-rig program or a 3-rig program, if you add 2 or 3 rigs, now all of a sudden that 10 years is down to 5 years. And all of a sudden in a year from now, your analysts are probably saying, well, what happens, in 2025? And you have to look and think, well, how am I going to transform this company? So given the fact that the politicians aren't giving you any real incentive to drill and the capital markets aren't giving you any incentive to drill, why on earth would you go and accelerate that depletion and pull that forward to today? It's not like the capital markets, it's not like your stock price is going to rally. If anything, your stock price will probably go down when you announce all this new spending. So I think all those three things together means that you've seen a very muted response from the industry, and that's just going to make the problem worse.